The White Man's Burden presentation. A little fast summary so that you know what I'm talking about. Rudyard Kipling is an English writer and poet, and he's best known for his children's book, The Jungle Book. Nevertheless, he has written several well-known poems and texts. But in this presentation, I'll focus on the poem "The White Man's Burden," which is a very controversial poem that today would, I think that it would be considered racist. However, it gives a very good insight into the view of humanity that we had back in the 19th. And it'll be clear that Rudyard Kipling is a supporter of imperialism. In the poem "The White Man's Burden," Rudyard Kipling talks about the task he believes that white men have compared to black people. He encourages the recipient, who is reserved for white people, to help with the white man's burden, that is, to help black people. So, in the text, blacks are described as aggressive prisoners, and Rudyard Kipling is talking about that you have to ignore their attitudes as they don't know better than white people do. And Rudyard Kipling sees it as a commitment and like a war against black humanity, which may seem brutal on the outside, but he argues that it's actually a struggle for peace. But I think to understand the principle of the poem, you must understand the past in England, in the history. The British lived in a rich and well-functioning society. The blacks were poor and lived in huts in poor living conditions. Over the years, a generalizing view of black people was formed. It was seen that you had a responsibility to them when they had to be civilized, like to become a part of the well-functioning British society. And in this poem, the focus is on the Filipinos when the black population is mentioned. And that's because England wanted to turn the Philippines into a US colony. And in those days, these kinds of poems were perceived as racist. No, I mean they were not perceived as racist. And you didn't like see these kinds of poems as racist at the time, but actually like very moral poems focused on helping the black people. And he believes that white people have a moral responsibility in improving the living conditions of black people. The mindset itself, I think, and the idea of it is nice and actually morally correct. But today, I think that you would define it as racist as you undermine an entire social group and consider yourself to be more powerful. But yeah, I think you can say that time changes. So the message in the poem and the purpose is actually very clear. It is that he informs the recipient, who is the white man, that we have a responsibility to civilize the blacks. The message is also that it's important to bring benefits of the Western world to the black people, especially in terms of living conditions. Thank you, Lene.